Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today we're tackling The Lord of the Rings. You've given us a ton of material on it, and we're ready to uncover its secrets. Whether you're a Tolkien expert or just curious about this epic, get ready to see why it's so captivating and why it's a landmark in fantasy, especially for lit students.
It's amazing how The Lord of the Rings still fascinates readers after all these years. It's more than just an adventure story, It's like this intricate tapestry with symbolism, complex characters, and timeless themes.
Okay, I love that tapestry image. But before we get lost in the threads, maybe we could zoom out a bit. How big is this world? For someone new to The Lord of the Rings, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? We've got hobbits, elves, dwarves, wizards. Where do you even start?
You're right. The Lord of the Rings takes us on a huge journey across Middle-earth. From the Shire, the Hobbits' homeland, all the way to Mordor. Tolkien's descriptions of these places are amazing. They feel expansive and detailed at the same time. And in the middle of it all is Frodo, a young hobbit who inherits a simple ring. But of course, it's not just Aang's ring, it's the One Ring. And the Dark Lord Sauron wants it.
Ah, yes, the One Ring. It's crazy how such a small thing can be so powerful, both in the story and for us reading it. And that quest to destroy the ring, that's what drives everything forward, doesn't it? Sends Frodo and his companions on this epic adventure over mountains, through forests, and right into Sauron's territory. A classic hero's journey, but with Tolkien's own twist.
Exactly. It's not just a straight line from start to finish. It's more like a reverse quest. It begins in this peaceful place, the Shire, and as the story goes on, that peace gets threatened. This structure makes a conflict even stronger, Sauron's darkness versus the resilience of the free peoples.
So, the Shire, as we said, is that idyllic starting point that gets threatened. What are some other key locations or events that shape this reverse quest idea? Things that would be interesting for literature students to analyze.
You can't talk about The Lord of the Rings without mentioning Bilbo's farewell feast. That's what kicks off the whole adventure. Then there's the Council of Elrond, where they decide the fate of the ring in Middle-earth. And obviously there are the big battles, like Helm's Deep and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Those aren't just exciting scenes. They're crucial for understanding the characters and Tolkien's themes.
Those battles are definitely unforgettable. The clashing armies, the heroism, the sheer scale of it all. But for you, as a literature student, what stands out about those moments?
It's fascinating how Tolkien uses them to explore the complexities of war, how it affects people. Take Helm's Deep, a brutal siege, a desperate fight. But it also shows the courage of the human spirit. Tolkien doesn't hide the horrors of war, but he highlights the strength and camaraderie that come out in those moments.
That's a good point. He's not making war glorious, but looking at all its sides.
Right, and that's why The Lord of the Rings still feels relevant today. It deals with those universal themes, conflict, courage, and hope, even in the darkest times.
We've got this epic quest, vivid settings, and characters facing huge challenges. But there's more to it than just adventure, isn't there? What are some of the deeper themes Tolkien explores? The stuff lit students really dig into.
Totally. On the surface, it's good versus evil. But Tolkien goes way beyond that. He explores how power corrupts, especially with the One Ring, how it tempts even the best people. Then there's death and immortality, the burden of leadership, and that enduring power of hope. These ideas are all over Middle-earth, and it makes the story resonate on a much deeper level.
I'm particularly fascinated by how the ring affects different characters. It's like a test, isn't it? Gollum is totally enslaved by it, while someone like Galadriel sees its beauty but resists. And even Frodo, carrying it for so long, can't destroy it himself in the end. What do you think that says about Tolkien's view of human nature, especially as a lit student analyzing those characters?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of why Tolkien is so brilliant. He seems to be saying that power can corrupt even the best intentions. True strength is about resisting that temptation. The fact that it takes Gollum to destroy the ring, well, it shows how good and evil can be connected in unpredictable ways. It's not always about grand heroism. Sometimes it's the smallest, most unexpected actions that change everything.
I love that idea of unlikely heroes. Why do you think Tolkien chose hobbits, these ordinary creatures, for this huge struggle? What does that choice tell us?
That's interesting. Hobbits, as Tolkien describes them, are simple, happy with their quiet lives. They're not your typical heroes. But it's that unassuming nature that makes them resistant to the ring. They value friendship, loyalty, home, and these values become their strength.
So it's like he's saying greatness can be found in the ordinary, in everyday kindness and courage. Quite powerful, especially given when he was writing after 2 world wars.
Definitely. That message of finding strength in the ordinary really connects with readers, especially those studying literature and looking for deeper meaning in what they read.
Speaking of deeper meaning, you can't ignore Tolkien's world building.
Right.
He created an entire universe. Languages, history, mythology, even family trees. It's mind-blowing. He even includes those detailed appendices, digging into lineages, timelines, and languages. It's like he wanted to make Middle-earth real.
It's true. The Lord of the Rings is part of a much bigger mythology that Tolkien worked on for years. The appendices, along with things like the Silmarillion, give us glimpses into this massive world, so there's even more to discover beyond the main story.
I can definitely see why The Lord of the Rings had such a huge impact on fantasy. It's not just a story. It's a world that invites you to explore and get lost in its complexities, like a literary playground for those who love analyzing language, symbolism, and themes.
You got it. And that's something we'll look at further when we talk about Tolkien's influences and how they adapted this epic work into movies and plays. But before we move on, what stands out to you so far as we dive into this world?
What strikes me is the tension between the scale of the story and the personal journeys. We've got these epic battles and good versus evil, but at its heart, it's about individual choices, fighting temptation, and those small acts of courage. It reminds you that even in darkness, one person can make a difference.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so relatable. It's in a fantasy world, but it's about human things. It really makes you think going deeper into Middle-earth. How did Tolkien, a language scholar, build this whole world? What inspired him?
That's a great question. We talked about him creating a mythology for England, but what were the pieces of that, his influences?
Well, his Catholic faith was huge. You see echoes of Christian themes all through The Lord of the Rings. Sacrifice, redemption, hope in the face of despair. Those are familiar to anyone studying literature, especially when looking at religion or philosophy in those works.
So not a direct allegory, but those beliefs are like a framework for exploring bigger questions. Has a book or movie ever made you rethink your beliefs?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's amazing how a story can make you question your whole worldview. And for Tolkien, World War I was a huge influence too, a truly horrific experience. Many scholars think the devastation he saw had a direct impact on how he shows the battle between good and evil in Middle-earth.
That makes sense. The scale of the conflict, the world in danger. It mirrors the real horrors of war.
Yeah.
I definitely felt that connection reading about those battles.
It's more than just the battles themselves. Tolkien captures the trauma, the psychological impact, like Frodo's journey. He's not a soldier, but he carries this massive burden, this weight that almost crushed him. It's like a reflection of the shell shock and emotional scars soldiers carried after the war.
That's powerful. Tolkien's life woven into his work. For someone who loves analyzing literature, that connection to the author adds so much.
It's fascinating, right? And along with the war, his love of language and mythology was crucial. Tolkien was a master world builder, but he didn't just invent Middle-earth. He was inspired by Norse myths, Anglo-Saxon literature, Celtic legends, took those threads and wove them into something new yet familiar.
Like he tapped into something ancient and universal.
Yeah.
Those primal stories that resonate across cultures. Makes you think about how we, even today, are drawn to those timeless themes.
Exactly. He didn't just borrow those myths, he transformed them, gave them new life in his own creation. That's part of what makes The Lord of the Rings last. It feels both timeless and deeply connected to history.
Okay, so this mix of experience and ancient mythology shaped Tolkien's world. But how did people react back then? Was it an instant success?
It's funny. The initial response was mixed. Some critics thought it was just childish fantasy, while others saw it as a masterpiece. But it wasn't until the paperback editions came out in the 60s that it really blew up, especially among young people who saw it as part of the counterculture.
So it was kind of a sleeper hit. Didn't get the recognition it deserved at first. Makes you wonder how many other great books are out there waiting to be found.
Totally. And the fact that The Lord of the Rings eventually got so much praise, well, it shows how deep and rich it is. It keeps drawing readers back, showing new things each time.
We've talked about Tolkien's life, his inspiration, and how the book slowly became a hit. But I'm curious about the text itself. What are some key literary devices he uses? The kind of stuff literature students look for.
Great question. One of the most striking things is his use of language. He makes it feel deep and historical. He invented languages, made family trees, wrote songs and poems that feel ancient.
Reading the book, you really get that sense that this world existed before the story, right? Like there's this weight of history.
Exactly. It's not just the words. It's how he uses them to create a mood. He's lyrical and poetic, describing Lothlorien, then stark and almost brutal when showing the horrors of Mordor. He also does something called interlacing, weaving together multiple storylines.
Wait, interlacing. For those of us who aren't literary experts, could you explain that?
Sure. Think of a tapestry, lots of threads coming together to make a picture. That's what Tolkien does with his story. Jumps between characters and journeys, slowly revealing the whole picture, builds suspense, and makes everything feel connected.
Ah, I see. Like each thread matters, but it's the combination that makes it intricate and beautiful.
Exactly. And this weaving lets him play with time and perspective. We see things from different viewpoints, which makes the characters and relationships more complex, works really well in epics like The Lord of the Rings.
I love that tapestry idea. It helps understand how he structured this huge story. Speaking of huge, he creates this impression of depth, too. Not overwhelming us with information, but giving glimpses, hints of this vast history and mythology behind it all.
That's key. It makes you, the reader, want to figure things out, to fill in the gaps. He gives us the base, the foundation, then encourages us to build on it with our own ideas.
Not just reading, but taking part in the world building. I love that, like those choose-your-own-adventure books. Tolkien gives us power over our experience in Middle-earth.
Exactly. The pieces are there, but we, the readers, put them together, connect the dots, and create our understanding of this complex world. And that's one reason why The Lord of the Rings still means so much to so many people.
Okay, so we've got language, narratives, and depth. What other literary things should we look for?
Well, Tolkien was great at using symbolism.
Symbolism, a goldmine for lit students.
Right. Like the One Ring, it's more than just a powerful object. It represents temptation, the corrupting nature of power, and even the journeys themselves can be symbolic. Frodo's quest to destroy the ring, that can represent the good versus evil inside all of us.
Great example. The outward journey reflecting what's going on inside.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes it so great to analyze. Layers of meaning to unpack.
And the characters, they're so vivid, each with their own voice and reasons for doing things. Even the minor characters feel real. Shows how good a writer Tolkien was.
Absolutely. He creates characters we care about. They feel real even though they're hobbits or elves or dwarves. He shows their hopes and fears, their wins and losses, makes them human, even in this fantasy.
And he doesn't shy away from their flaws, their weak moments. Even heroes mess up, have doubts. It makes them more human, more like us.
Exactly. They're not perfect. They're complex individuals with hard choices in a world where good and evil are mixed up. And this complexity is in the moral dilemmas they face, too.
There are no easy answers in The Lord of the Rings, are there?
Nope. Tolkien gives us situations that are morally gray, making us think about sacrifice, duty, and power. Like Frodo's burden. Destroying the ring is a good goal, but it hurts him terribly. Is it worth it?
Tough question, and Tolkien doesn't make it simple. It's been debated for years.
That's what makes it thought-provoking. Not just a fun adventure, but something that makes us look at our own values, deal with tough questions, and think about our choices when things are hard.
I'm also struck by how he uses nature. The forests, mountains, rivers, they're not just background. They're like characters themselves.
Totally. Tolkien loved nature. You see it everywhere in The Lord of the Rings. He uses it to foreshadow, to reflect the characters' feelings, to create a sense of awe.
Like how the dead marshes reflect that emptiness Frodo and Sam feel going to Mordor.
Exactly.
What?
And the difference between the Shire, all green and peaceful, and Mordor, all barren and volcanic, shows the forces at play.
Tolkien thought about every detail in The Lord of the Rings. Plot, characters, language, themes, symbolism, even nature. Amazing.
All those details, those layers of meaning, that's what makes it more than just a story. It's art. Makes it great for analysis.
Makes you wonder what Tolkien would think about all the analysis. Would he be surprised by how much attention it got from scholars?
Interesting question. He was a scholar himself, so he knew how important analysis is. But he didn't like people interpreting his work allegorically. He always said it wasn't about World War II or any specific event.
So he saw it as a timeless story about universal human experiences.
Yeah, I think so. He saw it as myth-making, exploring basic truths about good and evil, courage and sacrifice, hope and despair, themes that resonate with those studying literature and trying to understand what it means to be human.
It's a powerful legacy.
Definitely. Tolkien's genius is still inspiring and challenging people all these years later.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Plot, themes, characters, Tolkien himself, and how the book affected culture. But there's one more thing. Legacy.
Ah, yes, legacy. It's impacted not just literature, but everything.
So many imitations, music, art, games. It's everywhere. The Lord of the Rings opened up a whole new way of telling stories.
Right. It brought fantasy back to life, paved the way for so many writers. And it goes beyond books. It's part of how we think about heroes and villains, quests, good versus evil.
The imagery from the books and movies is iconic. Everyone knows the Eye of Sauron, hobbits, the landscapes of Middle-earth.
Exactly. And the characters, too. We say Gandalf-like, or talk about orcs to describe things in real life. Tolkien's world is part of how we talk.
And it's more than images and characters. Those themes, temptation, friendship, courage, they resonate across cultures and time. It's like he understood something fundamental about being human.
You're right, that's the power of The Lord of the Rings. It's set in a fantasy world, but it's about us. It reminds us that anyone can make a difference, hope can survive, and our choices matter.
Perfect way to describe its impact. It's magic and adventure, but it makes us think about ourselves, our values, our choices.
Couldn't agree more. That's why it still matters decades later. It makes people think, talk, imagine.
I think we did a good job exploring this giant of a book. We talked about the story, themes, characters, Tolkien himself, adaptations, the impact. I feel like a Tolkien expert now.
As we finish, here's something to think about. What if the ring had never been found? How would things have gone in Middle-earth? Would Sauron have come back? Would the Shire have stayed peaceful? Tolkien never said, so we get to imagine.
That's what keeps it interesting. We keep imagining this world even after the book is over.
It's worth coming back to again and again. You find something new each time.
Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through Middle-earth. Until next time, may the road go ever on. We've really gone deep into Tolkien's world, huh? His influences, the impact of The Lord of the Rings. It's huge. But there's one more thing I'd love to explore. It's about the structure of the book itself. How it works as literature, especially for students studying it.
Oh, absolutely. The Lord of the Rings gets called genre fiction a lot, fantasy specifically, but it's so much more than that. It's complex. You can study it on all these different levels, and each time you read it, you find new meanings.
Exactly. We talked about his amazing use of language, the multiple storylines, that deep world building.
Yeah.
What else makes it so rich for lit students to analyze? What should they be paying attention to?
One thing that jumps out is how Tolkien uses archetypes. His characters are complex, but they often represent those classic types. The wise mentor, the reluctant hero, the loyal companion, the fallen king. These figures pop up all over literature and mythology.
Yeah, we see that in Gandalf, Frodo, Sam, even Theoden, the King of Rohan. They fit those classic roles, but Tolkien makes them individuals, not just stock characters.
Right. He uses those archetypes as a starting point, but then he fleshes them out, gives them personality, motivations, a past, makes them feel like real people. It's like he's taking these old forms and making them come alive for us today.
Like drawing from this well of mythology and stories, but adding his own twist. That connection to myth and legend feels super important for understanding it as literature. Tolkien studied those old texts. He used those traditions to create this epic feeling, this sense of timelessness.
Right. He wasn't just writing a fantasy novel. He was making a whole mythology for England, a modern epic with roots in those ancient traditions, blending the familiar and the fantastical. And that's why I think it connects with people so strongly. It taps into those basic stories about heroes, sacrifice, good versus evil, those stories that we've always told.
Those timeless themes really grab you, don't they? Make you think about your own life and the world. But Tolkien also kind of twists some of those traditional ideas. His heroes aren't always who you'd expect.
Exactly. Think about the hobbits. They're not warriors. They're not kings. They're simple. They love home and peace. And yet they save Middle-earth. It's powerful, showing how anyone can be heroic.
Reminds us that we can all make a difference, that even a small act of courage matters. Speaking of powerful, we can't forget how Tolkien uses language. He was a philologist. He loved words, and you can see that in his writing. Lyrical and poetic, but also stark and harsh when he needs it to be. Not many writers have that kind of control over language.
His descriptions of nature, oh, you feel like you're there. Walking through the Shire with the hobbits, feeling the heat of Mordor with Frodo and Sam. He makes the experience real for the reader.
And then there's how he uses language to create this feeling of history, of depth. He invented languages, made family trees, wrote songs and poems that feel ancient. It's like language is part of Middle-earth itself.
It's all those layers of language, those details, that give it such a rich feel. You can get lost in it. It feels real, even though it's fantasy.
And that's what makes it so great to study from a literary point of view. There's always something new to find, a hidden meaning in the language or the symbols. It's like peeling back layers. There's always more underneath.
You got it. You need to really read it closely, analyze it, And it still makes people debate and discuss, scholars and fans alike. Always more to discover.
I think we've given our listeners a great starting point for approaching The Lord of the Rings, not just as a good story, but as a work of literature. You can enjoy it on different levels, from the pure adventure to the deeper ideas about humanity and how stories work.
And remember, this is just the start. The Lord of the Rings is a world to explore, to discover.
So many paths to take, so much to think about. Learn the languages, explore the history and mythology, or just read it again and enjoy the writing. Every journey through Middle-earth is different. You find something new each time.
And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to create your own world, your own stories with magic, adventure, and meaning. Tolkien's legacy is more than just his books. It's about using your imagination, seeing what stories can do.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Lord of the Rings. Hope you enjoyed exploring this masterpiece. Until next time, happy reading.